There's a reason Hutterite colonies, Old Order Mennonite farms, and Amish communities have gone generations without touching a grocery store's meat aisle. It's not luck. It's not thrift. It's 5 trees planted decades ago by people who understood something most gardeners never learn. Protein doesn't need 4 legs. It grows on a branch. The rest of us are stuck in the same loop every year: tomatoes, peppers, a few squash, while the grocery bill keeps climbing because none of that touches the real expense. These communities solved that problem before any of us were born. They're still living proof it works. Today I'm showing you those same 5 trees, still standing on Hutterite and Amish land right now, producing protein at a scale most people don't believe until they see the numbers, enough to replace meat at your table for the next 100 years. Planted once, never again. Stick around to the end. Tree number 5 is a forgotten South American legume tree some call the tree that grows steak. Once you see what one mature tree produces, you'll understand why these communities have quietly relied on it for generations, while almost no one outside them knows it exists. Want real food independence instead of handing your paycheck to a grocery store that raises prices every month? Comment ready below. This is the blueprint these communities have lived by for generations. I'm handing it to you right now. Let's start with tree number 1. If you're new here, welcome to One Time Roots Heritage Homestead. If you've been here a while, thank you for coming back. It means everything. I'm Amos Noah. This channel draws on the time-tested, self-sufficient ways of the Hutterites, Old Order Mennonites, and Amish, masters of low-tech gardening and food security that lasts generations. One core idea drives everything here: plant once, harvest forever. I share perennial food plants, small space growing tips, garden recovery tricks, backyard income ideas, and the forgotten homestead skills that kept our grandparents self-sufficient. Minimal effort, maximum results. Land, a windowsill, or just the will to start, I'm here to help you build long-term abundance. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you never miss a video. Today, plant these 5 protein trees once to feed your family without meat for 100 years. Number 1, the Chinese chestnut, the bread and protein staple that built mountain villages. For centuries, in Hutterite colonies and across the chestnut belts of Europe and Asia, this tree was called the bread tree because it did something almost no other tree could do: feed a family through a famine without a single animal in the barn. Most nuts are loaded with fat and short on substance. The chestnut is built different, dense in complex carbohydrates, a steady dose of plant protein, the original meat substitute long before anyone had a word for that. A single mature Chinese chestnut tree can drop 50 to 100 lb of nuts in a good year. Roast them, boil them, grind them into gluten-free flour. You've got a staple that stretches a pantry like nothing else in the orchard. In Old Order Mennonite households, chestnut flour wasn't a novelty. It was bread on the table when the hog wasn't ready for slaughter and the smokehouse sat empty. Here's the number that matters. 100 lb of chestnuts carries roughly 4 lb of usable plant protein, plus enough starchy calories to replace a sack of flour. That's not steak, but layered with the trees coming next, it's the foundation of a diet that doesn't blink when meat prices climb. Chinese chestnuts are blight-resistant. Unlike their American cousins, wiped out a century ago, they start producing in just 5 to 7 years. Once established, a single tree keeps bearing for over a century. The tree you plant this spring could still be feeding your grandchildren's grandchildren. The mistake most people make: planting only one. Chestnuts need a second tree nearby for pollination, a lesson Hutterite orchardists learned generations ago and never had to write down. Plant 2, give them a decade. You've installed a permanent bread and protein factory that outlasts the building it's planted beside. Tree number 2 doesn't just feed you, it stores fat and protein dense enough to carry a family through an entire winter, and it's almost twice as protein dense as this one. Number 2, the hazelnut, the shelf-stable protein bank that needs no refrigeration. If the chestnut is the bread tree, the hazelnut is the meat locker. The chestnut leans on carbohydrates, The hazelnut flips the equation, a dense combination of healthy fat and real protein, small enough to fit in your palm. Hutterite and Old Order Mennonite families have relied on it for generations, not because it's trendy, because it solves the problem most homesteaders never plan for. How do you store protein for an entire winter without a freezer? A single mature hazelnut tree produces 10 to 20 lb of nuts a year. Per pound, that's nearly 3 times the protein of the chestnut you just planted. Run the math across a small grove of 5 or 6 trees, and you're looking at a protein harvest that rivals what most families spend at the meat counter across an entire season. Here's the detail almost nobody talks about. Left in their shells, hazelnuts stay fresh and edible for over a year, 0 refrigeration, 0 processing, no smokehouse, no salt cure, no chest freezer running up your electric bill. The shell does the preservation work nature already engineered. The same reason European communities leaned on hazelnuts to survive grain failures and harsh winters for centuries before anyone packaged a protein bar. They're also one of the fastest producers on this list. Chestnuts ask for 5 to 7 years. A hazelnut can begin bearing in as little as 3 to 4 years. Once established, it keeps producing for 40 to 60 years with almost no maintenance. No spraying, no babysitting, just steady annual protein, year after year, while you focus your attention elsewhere. Like the chestnut, hazelnuts need a partner. Plant at least 2 different varieties for cross-pollination, and you'll never run short. It's the kind of decision an Amish orchardist makes without a second thought, the decision that determines whether your land actually feeds you or just decorates your yard. 2 trees down, you're already holding more shelf-stable protein than most backyard gardens produce in a decade. What's coming next operates on a different scale entirely, fat and protein numbers that can replace a freezer full of meat almost on their own. Number 3, the walnut, the calorie-dense fat and protein powerhouse that replaces a freezer. If hazelnuts are the meat locker, walnuts are the slaughterhouse. Hutterite colonies have always treated this tree as a dual investment, feeding the family every year, paying out a second time in timber once it's fully grown. But the number that matters most is the protein and fat combination. Nothing else on this list touches it. A single mature walnut tree produces 50 to 80 lb of nuts annually. That's roughly 150,000 to 240,000 calories from one tree alone. Pound for pound, about 15 g of protein, 65 g of fat, the exact combination your body reaches for when meat isn't on the table. In a survival scenario, this is the tree that fills the gap meat leaves behind, omega-3s included. Something most plant-based protein sources simply can't claim. The shell does the same job the hazelnut's shell does, keeping the nut fresh for over a year with 0 refrigeration. No smokehouse, no curing, just a hard shell nature already perfected. The patience required is real. Walnuts take 6 to 10 years before they start producing, longer than anything before it. But once they start, they don't stop. For 150 to 200 years, an investment still feeding your great-grandchildren long after every grocery store price tag from this decade is forgotten. Here's the part most gardening channels never mention. Walnut wood is worth thousands of dollars per mature tree. You're not just planting a protein source, you're planting an inheritance that pays twice, once every autumn, and once, decades from now, as a legacy your descendants can cash in. 3 trees in, you've stacked bread, shelf-stable protein, and now serious fat reserves. But the next tree does something none of these 3 can. It doesn't ask you to wait a decade. It starts feeding you almost immediately. Number 4, the mulberry, the fast-fruiting protein fruit nobody expects. Every tree so far has asked for patience. 5 years for chestnuts, 3 or 4 for hazelnuts, 6 to 10 for walnuts. The mulberry breaks that pattern entirely. Hutterite and Amish orchards have always planted it alongside the slower nut trees, because while everything else is still establishing itself underground, the mulberry is already putting fruit on the table. Mulberries are the rebel of the protein world. Dried, they carry close to 10% protein, an exceptional number for anything growing on a fruit tree. You'll almost never find them at a grocery store. They're too delicate to survive a supply chain, bruising at the slightest touch. That's exactly why nobody sells them to you, and exactly why growing your own is the only way most families will ever taste one. A single mature mulberry tree can drop 50 to 80 lb of fruit every summer, often beginning to fruit in just 3 to 5 years, faster than nearly anything else on this list. In parts of Central Asia, dried mulberries have been a winter staple for generations, eaten the way Americans eat trail mix, a dense, portable protein source that needs no refrigeration once dried. Here's what makes the mulberry essential. It's bulletproof, poor soil, drought, total neglect. It doesn't care, zero pruning, zero pest control. While you're waiting years for chestnuts and walnuts to mature, the mulberry is already doing the work, filling the protein gap in the meantime with almost no effort from you. It's the lazy tree that keeps on giving for 50+ years. The bridge between planting day and the slower trees finally hitting their stride. 4 trees down: bread, shelf-stable protein, dense fat reserves, and now fast, early protein while you wait. But tree number 5 is the one I promised you at the very beginning. The one almost nobody outside these old farming communities has even heard of. Number 5, the chachafruto, the tree that grows steak. This is the tree I promised you at the start. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Chachafruto, also called balu, grows wild and cultivated across the Andean highlands of Colombia and Ecuador, where rural farming families have relied on it for generations the same way Hutterite and Mennonite communities rely on chestnuts and walnuts. It's a legume, the same family as beans, except instead of a vine you replant every season, you're harvesting from a permanent tree. Here's the number that earns it the nickname. Chachafruto seeds carry roughly 20% protein by weight, on par with many cuts of meat, far beyond anything else on this list. A single mature tree produces enormous pods, each packed with seeds the size of a small potato. A tree in full production can yield hundreds of pounds of these protein-dense seeds in a single season. Like beans, the raw seeds aren't eaten straight off the tree. They're boiled, the same simple process that's kept Andean families fed for centuries. Once cooked, the texture and substance resemble a hearty meat dish far more than anything you'd expect from a tree. There's a second advantage almost nobody mentions. Chachafruto is nitrogen-fixing. Just like the beans it's related to, the tree improves the soil around it every year instead of depleting it, and it grows fast. Walnuts ask for the better part of a decade. Chachafruto can begin producing in as little as 2 to 3 years, real protein on your table, almost as fast as the mulberry, but at nearly double the protein density. Put these 5 trees together: bread from the chestnut, shelf-stable protein from the hazelnut, dense fat reserves from the walnut, fast early protein from the mulberry, and now a tree that produces something close to meat itself from the chachafruto. You've built a system that doesn't just supplement a diet, it replaces the meat counter entirely, for 100 years, from 5 trees planted once. 5 trees, bread, protein storage, fat reserves, fast fruit, and now a tree that grows something close to meat itself. That's not a garden plan. That's a complete protein system, the same system Hutterite colonies, Old Order Mennonite farms, and Amish communities have quietly run for generations, long before anyone needed a video to explain it. Building a food legacy isn't about this year's harvest. It's about shifting from someone who buys protein to someone who grows it. The modern food system depends on fragile supply chains and rising prices. A backyard planted with these 5 trees stands as a permanent, self-renewing source of protein no grocery store can take from you. You don't need all 5 this season. Even 1 is a start. Plant it. Give it patience. You're trading a little space and time today for 100 years of food security for your family. Which of these 5 are you planting first? Drop a comment and let's talk about it. If this gave you a new way to think about feeding your family, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this legacy knowledge still to share.